Welcome all to the session of management principles and applications. And today again we'll be doing some more short notes which the new contemporary management has to deal with. Sociocracy and democracy. Now, the concepts of democracy and sociocracy have come from socio-political systems. These terms are also applied to business and management. Democracy and sociocracy are the two alternative ways to run an organization. Each has different underlying principles. While democracy has been applied to management since long, sociocracy is also emerging as an effective way of decision making and governance in the modern organization. As we know, democracy is demos, which is common people, and Kratos is the strength. So the principle of democracy is corporate democracy. An analogy can be drawn between the way people elect their representatives, who form the government, and shareholders who appoint the board of directors to run the company. The shareholders also have the right to participate and vote in the annual meetings of the company, and thus are involved in decision making through majority vote. Corporate democracy refers to its power enjoyed by the shareholders. The core principle of democracy, like transparency, public debate, and voting, are also applied to the organizational democracy. This concept of democracy in organizations is not only limited to shareholders but also is applied to the employees. Depending on the size and culture in the organization, workplace democracy may be implemented with different levels of employee participation and involvement. And about the term sociocracy, it was coined by Auguste Comte in 1851, and it means the socios, which means colleagues and companions, and kratia means the ruling class. So sociocracy is another system of governance which is slowly gaining popularity in business. It is also known as dynamic governance. So sociocracy is governance just system, just like democracy or corporate governance methods. It's best suited for organizations that want to self-govern based on the values of equality. Some people refer sociocracy as dynamic self-governance or simply dynamic. History of sociocracy. What we call sociocracy now was first developed by Sociocratic Circle method by Gerald Edinburgh in Netherlands in 1980s. Natural system, complex organization work as decentralized nested systems that are semi-autonomous. That means they are both autonomous and dependent on each other. For example, the respiratory and the nervous system. Sociocracy builds on set of simple rules. For example, a simple rule defines how to create the circle. The same rule then allows any circle to form a subcircle and the subcircle to form the sub-subcircles and so on. Decision making builds on decision making by the Quakers that have strong commitment to inclusion and egalitarian values. Sociocracy cybernetics uses feedback loops to learn about the impact of action. So, what are the principles and tools of sociocracy? Organizational structure. Small groups are the basis of everything. These small groups are called circles. Those sociocratic circles have a defined aim, a description what the circle is doing, and full authority, what the circle has authority over. Circles will define roles, both to run itself smoothly and to package operations into meaningful bits. Any member will fill one or more roles. Linking roles connect circles to other related circles. In double linking, two people from one circle, the delegate and the leader, are also full members of the parent circle, so information can flow between the teams and their decisions align. Then decision making in rounds. Circle make policy decisions by consent. So there is a consent to a proposal. When no member of the circle has an objection, by definition, objecting requires that a circle member has reason to assume that circle cannot achieve its aim adequately if the circle approves the proposal. In other words, any circle member can flag an issue in proposal and make sure the circle improves the proposal before passing it. At the same time, circle uses consent to elect people into roles like the circle leader, secretary, facilitators, or self-defined operational role. The intention is that only people serve in offices who have the trust of all their co-workers. A circle will decide by consent what topic they put on their agenda and how much time they spend on each topic. Then we have rounds. A trademark tool for meetings. Rounds refers to the practice of talking one by one in meetings until everyone has spoken once in that round. The intention is to hear all voices. At the same time, rounds contribute to more mutual listening and understanding. Then continuous improvement. A set of practices supports the general commitment for continuous improvement of the organization. Examples are performance reviews, meeting evaluations, or requirement to set review dates for policies. The intention is for these agreements to be lived and maintained well. Intentional spaces for feedback encourage a commitment to growth and learning through feedback both on the organizational level, team level, and individual level. Then use and movements within sociocracy. Sociocracy is used in many sectors with a global reach, most commonly in Europe and America. Specifically, many intentional communities like co-housing and eco-villages use sociocracy. Some non-profits, cooperative workplaces like work cooperatives and non-hierarchical workplaces use sociocracy as well as schools. Its principles have resemblance to permaculture and cooperative principles as well as agile practices. Also, many organizations combine sociocracy with tools like non-violent communication or other framework. Within the sociocratic movement, jargon can differ. Now, how does sociocracy differ from consensus or voting? How does it differ from hierarchy? Before getting into that, let us see or compare between democracy and sociocracy. We have to understand that these are the alternate systems of governing an organization. Democracy and sociocracy may differ in many aspects. Like in democracy, decision is taken through majority rule, but sociocracy it is based on consensus. Democracy is governed by the common people, while sociocracy is governed by the colleagues or the associates who take the decisions together. In democracy, people, the all the members, such as shareholders, have a vote, but the level of involvement of all members is not the same. The majority shareholders have more interest and involvement. The minority shareholders may get disinterested because of that. But in sociocracy, all the members are actively involved in governance. In democracy, the decisions are always implemented top down. In case of sociocracy, many political decisions are made by circle itself. Further, there is double linking through the elected representatives who represents the interest of lower level circle at the higher level. So with this, we come to the difference between consensus and consent is not clear cut because the practice of consensus varies. The simplistic difference in consensus requires agreement. Consent requires that no one disagrees. A circle member that objects will need to state their objections with reference to the circle's aim. Understanding the core of the objection can then improve the proposal. Another difference is that consensus run organizations often require the group of all members to make decision together. This is not the case in sociocracy, where decision making is distributed and decentralized into smaller group. Voting and consent differ in that in consent decision making, the majority cannot outvote the minority. A group will strive to integrate each objection until all members consent. The idea behind that is that minority opinions matter and the majority vote tends to polarize instead of bringing people together. Hierarchy or top down decisions are typically autocratic decisions where the superior can overrule the subordinate. This is not the case in sociocracy. Each circle or role will have authority in a defined domain. Since domains are nested, there is hierarchy of domains but no autocratic relationship between people or roles. The combination of top down and bottom up linking between circles lead to circular hierarchy. The limits of sociocracy and ideal use case. Consent requires working through issues in a collaborative manner. That means the sociocracy requires a commitment to listening, learning, and using its tools. For some, this might require some unlearning of the practices they have been doing from hierarchical contexts. Because it was developed for organizations, sociocracy works best in organizations that have a certain level of clarity and structure. It works best in organizations where most members are operationally involved and can be part of decision making circles in an area where they have expertise as well as experience. Subaltern studies from India. This word subaltern refers to person of inferior rank because he belongs to a particular caste, class, gender, or race. The subaltern had historically lower ranked authority and power in society and was usually subject to domination of the ruling class. Like, we had zamindari system with us, so the peasants or the farmers, they were the ones who were working, and India had subalterns. So in similarly, under the British rule, Indians were subalterns. So the subaltern thought stands for understanding of issues from the perspective of the masses who were usually unrepresented. A group remains subaltern until it succeeds in transforming the terms of social and political relations that cause its marginalization. So, the term subaltern in this context is an allusion to the work of Italian Marxist Antonio Gramsci. The term's semantic range has evolved from its first usage by Ranjit Guha following Gramsci to refer solely to peasants who had not been integrated into industrial capitalist system. It now refers to any person or group of inferior rank or station, whether because of race, class, gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, or religion. The Subaltern Studies Group or Studies Collective is a group of South Asian scholars interested in post colonial and post imperial societies. The term subaltern societies is sometimes also applied more broadly to others who share many of their views, and they are often considered to be exemplary of post colonial studies as one of the most influential movements in the field. Their anti essentialist approach is one of the history from below focus more what happens among the masses at the base levels of society than among the elite. If we go into the history, it emerges around 1982 as a series of journal articles published by Oxford University Press in India. A group of Indian scholars trained in the West wanted to reclaim their history. Its main goal was to relate history for underclass, for the voices that had not been heard previously. Scholars of the subaltern hope to break away from histories of elites and Eurocentric bias of current imperial history. In the main, they wrote against the Cambridge School, which seemed to be uphold the colonial legacy. That is, it was elite centered. Instead, they focused on subaltern in terms of class, caste, gender, race, language, and culture. They espouse the idea that there may have been political dominance, but that this was not hegemonic. So the primary leader was Ranjit Guha, who had written works on peasant uprisings in India. Another of the leading scholars of subaltern studies is Gayatri Chakravarti Spivak. She draws on number of theoretical positions in her analysis of Indian history: deconstruction, Marxism, feminism. She was highly critical of current histories of India that were told from the vantage point of the colonizers and presented a story of the colony via the British administrators, like, Young. So, what she and other historians, including Ranjit Guha, wanted was to reclaim their history to give voice to the subjected people. Any other history merely reconstruct imperialist hegemony and does not give voice to the people, those who resisted, those who supported, those who experienced colonial incursion. So, according to the Subaltern Studies Group, the history is designed to be a contribution made by people on their own, that is, independent of the elite. They did this by establishing a journal out of Oxford, Delhi, and Australia, and is called Subaltern Studies, to write a history against the grain and restore history to the subordinated. So, in other words, to give the common people back their agency. If we actually see, then who can serve as subalterns? The managers are subalterns of the top management. The women's are subaltern to the to the males because of the glass ceiling, which we have already discussed. Then socially backward classes can be subalterns. So these were the studies that were conducting to show the subaltern state in the business as well. The criticism. One of the group's early contributors, Sumit Sarkar, later began to critique it. He entitled one of his essays Decline of Subaltern and Subaltern Studies, criticized the turn to Foucauldian studies of power knowledge that left behind many of the empiricist and Marxist efforts of the first two volumes of Subaltern Studies. He writes that the socialist inspiration behind the early volumes led to a greater impact in India itself, while the later volumes focused on Western discourse, refined the subaltern colonized divide, and then rose in prominence mainly in Western academia. Even Gayatri Spivak, one of the most prominent names associated with the movement, has called herself a critic of metropolitan post colonialism. Indian sociologist Vivek Chibber has criticized the premise of subaltern studies for its obfuscation of class struggle and class formation in its analysis, and accused of excising class exploitation from the story of oppression of the subaltern. His critic explained in his book Post-Colonial Theory and the Spectre of Capital is focused on the works of two Indian scholars, Ranjit Guha and Dipesh Chakrabarti. According to Chibber, subaltern scholars tend to recreate the Orient as a place where cultural differences negate analysis based on Western experiences. So we can see that subaltern studies has been there, and they have been criticized because of they have been only making it the colonizer divide more prominent. So, this was about subaltern studies of India. So, the next is innovation and entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurship is actually not a new phenomena, but it has become more important because of its recognition of the role it plays in economic development of a country. As we know, entrepreneurship is basically an attempt to create value through recognition of business opportunities, or maybe the management of risk taking appropriate to opportunity, and through the communicative and management skills to mobilize human, financial, and material resources necessary to bring a project to fruition. So, there are various functions of an entrepreneurship we get from this, that it creates value and it fosters innovation and creativity. It takes a risk, it helps in economic development, and it improves the standard of living, through innovations in products, services, and processes. So the term entrepreneurship reminds us of famous entrepreneurs like Bill Gates, Steve Jobs, Dhirubhai Ambani, Narayan Murthy, who had a humble beginning and built their businesses from scratch. So, innovation is, goes along with entrepreneurship. And an enterprise need not be small and new to be an entrepreneur. Like General Electric example, like Peter F. Drucker took, that a large and well established company that practices entrepreneurship in its new business. This entrepreneurship is a dynamic process which can be practiced by individuals as well as organizations, whether they are old or startups. And the process of creating value by developing new products, services, or processes is an existing organization is called corporate entrepreneurship. Companies like Google and 3M are amazing examples of corporate entrepreneurship. Then we come to innovation. Innovation is the specific tool of entrepreneurs, the means by which they exploit change as the opportunity for a different business or different service. It is capable of being presented as a discipline, capable of being learned, capable of being practiced. Entrepreneurs need to search purposefully for the sources of innovation, the changes and their symptoms that indicate opportunities for successful innovation. And they need to know and to apply the principles of successful innovation. If we talk about innovation, the successful conversion of new concepts and knowledge into new products and services or processes that deliver new customer values in the marketplace would lead to innovation. Uh, Innovation is also, it aims at creating value by solving problems. It can be structural or technical. It involves developing new things or doing things in a new way. So in innovation there can be, it is for competencies and for core competencies. Competencies are the necessary ingredients for the entrepreneurial competence. So there can be individual competencies that are the combination of learnable behaviors that encompass attitudes, skills, knowledge, practice experiences, and natural talents for person in order to effectively accomplish an explicit goal within a specific context. Then there are collective competencies. These are synergistic combination of individual competencies of team members within the organizations. So there is continuum that exists from low functioning team to high functioning team. High functioning team, although very rare, but are those that apply collective competencies the most effective way. Then there are core competencies. So these are those that are collectively held, and that includes the learnable behaviors the entire organization must practice in order to achieve competence in relation to the organization's purpose and its competitive environment. A core competency encompasses the knowledge, skills, and technology that create unique customer value. Now we come to elements of innovation. Matthews and Brugman identified the following 12 elements of innovation. They argued that innovation is best understood by first examining each of the following elements. The first is innovation degrees. Incremental innovations are small scale improvements on what is already being done, often with the intention to improve efficiencies, to reduce costs, or improve products or services offered. So both Six Sigma and Lean are well regarded managerial quality improvement programs that explicitly target the removal of many times of organizational waste and variability. And incremental innovation can be used to differentiate products for marketing purposes as well. Then innovation types. So there are many types of innovations. Organizing innovation into types makes it easier to understand how you can use multiple types of innovation simultaneously. The fundamental innovation types includes product innovation, customer experience innovation, solution innovation, systems innovation, process innovation, business and managerial model innovations. So these are the different types of innovations that a company can undertake. Then innovation direction. Innovation direction is a concept that encompasses forward and reverse innovation. Innovation direction is a notion that is based on source and target of the innovation. A forward innovation would have its source in country X and the target in country X. A reverse innovation would have its source in country Y and later targeted to a different country such as country X. So country X or Y could be developed or developing country. So innovation can flow in any direction. Then another element of innovation is innovation risk. Um, the entrepreneurial ecosystem indicates that individuals, firms, and organizations are interconnected in ways that impact each other. According to Matthews and Brugman, co innovation risk occurs when multiple actors in the ecosystem attempt to innovate, which leads to the possibility that a new innovation developed by one company is ready at a different time than a dependent second innovation developed by another firm. Like, for example, it can be disastrous for a computer hardware company to release a new product that is dependent upon new software if the company developing that software does not make that on the available time. Then innovation principles and tenets. Both non-profit and for-profit organizations are governed by the principle that dictate how they operate. Non-profits often strive to alleviate social problems, while for-profit attempts to satisfy the desire of their shareholders. An increasing number of organizations are adopting alternative measures of performance that include not only economic outcomes but also social and environmentally possible responsible results. That is a triple bottom line. Then innovation thresholds. Organizations should strive to achieve their innovation threshold. What is that? It is a marker that each business sector needs to achieve in order to be competitive. To thrive, an organization cannot under innovate, while over innovation would be wasteful and ineffectual. Innovation threshold ranges from low to high and are different for each business sector. Once an organization achieves the innovation threshold, additional innovation may not matter. Innovation criteria. It argues that a design should be judged based on its desirability, feasibility, and viability. An innovative design needs to be desirable, feasible, and aligned with a sustainable business model. Innovation process. Another element of innovation is the set of planned innovation processes that are required to make innovation happen. These processes must balance the need to provide customers with what they want with what is technologically feasible and financially viable. One example of innovation process is design thinking. Then, innovative diffusion. Lundball defined diffusion of innovation as adoption and implementation of new ideas, processes, products, or services, as she studied the diffusion of innovation within and across organizations. This concept is particularly important because many sectors of the economy strive for organizational improvement, but innovations often are not diffused within and across organizations to achieve improvement. Then, innovation pacing. Innovation pacing refers to the speed with which an organization delivers innovations and how that impacts its ability to compete. Pacing is influenced by your innovation capability and the ability of your customers to adopt to those innovations. Then, innovation value. Red ocean strategies focus on competing with other players for market share within industries that currently exist. Now, this type of thinking can be constrained if it restricts organizations' ability to adapt to change and to figure out ways to pursue blue ocean strategies, namely entirely new markets, business models, industries, and other opportunities that others have not yet been conceptualized or pursued. Blue ocean strategies are not about competing with others, they are about rendering competitors irrelevant because they are not playing in the same field as your organization, and more importantly, they are not matching the value that you create for customers in the new market that you opened up. Value without innovation is an improvement that may not be sufficient for organic growth. Innovation without value does not provide the utility that customers would be willing to purchase. Innovations needs to be aligned with the value comprised of utility, price, and cost. Disruptive innovation. The last element is disruptive innovation. Disruptive innovations are different than incremental, evolutionary, and revolutionary innovation degrees. A disruptive innovation is not a revolutionary innovation that makes other innovations like products and services better. Rather, a disruptive innovation transforms any type of innovation that historically was expensive and complicated into an innovation that is affordable, simple, and available to broader markets. So, this was all about the elements of innovation. Now, innovation, it is like I've told you, is the key. It's the key to entrepreneurial success. While innovations are usually seen to be technology driven, this is not always true because innovations can be in processes or in the business strategies. So it just depends on what kind of innovation are we talking about, and with these elements of innovation we can well imagine it is through a combination of the values of an organization and innovation that can succeed and grow in today's dynamic and changing environments. Thank you so much for listening.